Okay,
Double check. You see my framing, Bill?
I do.
Any objections, or you good?
Nope, I'm gonna work a little tighter once we get going here, so I don't match you so much.
Okay.
You ready?
One
Yes.
moment. Okay, 3 cameras rolling, mark it.
First of all, thank you. I have, ever since I started this project, I have been looking forward to meeting you and spending some time with you. You have, as I explained when we were at your home, I know you've been interviewed many, many times, and a lot of people have asked you about your experiences. The difference in this project is this is for the military. The military wants to learn from the crucible of leadership and military organization and experience that all of you went through. And it's really singular and remarkable the ways that you bonded, pulled together, and found each other and yourselves in that experience. So at times I'm going to be referring to my notes. Please don't mind if you see me looking down and reading. I've got so many questions I want to ask you, and I want to make sure that I cover everything about it. So I'll be referring to my notes at times. And let me make sure this is locked. Okay, great. So to start with, if you could, sir, state your name, your rank at retirement from the military, and talk a little bit in general about your shoot-down experience and what landed you in the circumstances that you found yourself in the Hanoi prison system.
Well, my name is Richard Stratton. I retired as a captain with a regular commission in the Navy, and I spent 31 years of total service, both National Guard and Navy service. I was stationed on board the USS Ticonderoga in 1966, and we were deployed to the South China Sea to fly missions against North Vietnam and targets in South Vietnam. We deployed about my birthday in October of 1966. I remember it because my youngest son walked the day after I left, just to stick it to his father, I guess. But I had 3 boys, 1, 3, and 5. My wife Alice was a clinical social worker in Hanford, California. We were stationed at the Naval Air Station Lemoore. And she took me off to the air patch at Lemoore to fly down to join the ship in San Diego. And she had Pat, Mike, and Charlie, the 3 boys, in the back of the station wagon, and they were doing what kids do at that age. They were fighting and excreting and yelling. And I am fleeing from the peace of peace for the peace of war, because every good sailor knows that deployments are good for marriages. They extend them. The wife is glad to get rid of you, and it's time to get a little relief. But as I left, she whistled me back to the side of the car. And I leaned down to hear these gentle words of farewell from my wife, and she said, "Don't you dare die and leave me with these 3 little bastards." Yeah, I sort of, at that I tippy-toed off, and we flew off to war. And it was, we'll talk about the war some other time if you're interested, but it was a strange war. Mr. McNamara and Mr. Johnson's war. But after the Christmas break, we were fighting a war by taking Christmas off and giving the enemy a chance to rearm and stuff like that. So the first combat hop in January of '67, I hop in an airplane that we happened to have stole from the Marine Corps at Atsugi and went out on a reconnaissance mission. So my best friend asked me to take the hop for him, and I forgot the major rule of survival, and that is don't volunteer for nothing. And I volunteered, and sure enough, I got there and found some barges sitting idle at the side of a river and decided to blow them up and fired off an Aero 7D rocket pack. And all the rockets went out and exploded right in front of the airplane. And the engine ingested all the debris from the explosion, and the airplane lost its tail when the engine blew up. So at 2,200 feet and 220 knots, these words from Lemoore, California echo, "Don't you dare die and leave me with these three little bastards." Because I had no desire to be a prisoner for the next 25 years in jail. And if we fought the war right, we would have been there that long. But those words motivated me, and I ejected, and the bad day continued. I landed in the only tree behind the only house in 5 square miles. And before I had my helmet off, I was a prisoner for approximately 2,251 days, 10 hours and 20 minutes. So that's how I got into North Vietnam.
Wow. One of the singular things about all of you is your experience traces in many ways the experience of the country. As I've talked to your former fellow POWs, I hear a consistent theme, which is that we went into the Vietnam War having been successful in World War II, successful in Korea. We had mechanical and electronic dominance, military dominance, and we expected in many ways to see a similar result in Vietnam. And that isn't what happened. We went in having been raised on John Wayne movies where the American could endure any amount of pain and never give in and never give up. And in your words, and I believe this is absolutely the truth in every story I've heard, the men in the POW camps were not broken, but they were bent. Under extreme duress and under extreme pain, every one of them had to learn that, as Al Carpenter said to me, "Patrick, if I stand on your balls long enough, you're going to say whatever I want you to." One of the most insidious things that the Vietnamese did, because in truth, pilots didn't really have intel for more than 7 days out. By mission requirements, it's designed to keep you ignorant. So at a certain point, your value to the Vietnamese on the level of intel was very limited. But they forced you again and again and again under torture. And the purpose was, and perhaps the most insidious thing they did, was once they got you to bend, to give more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. They would then leave you alone in a cell. As Reed McCleary said to me, "Patrick, I lay in my cell alone for 1.5 years and feeling a complete failure, that I had failed my country, that when I got out I could not return to the United States. I would have to go move to South America or anything else, other places." You had a second in command, Heller, I believe is his last name, who actually tried to take his own life in that despair. Speak to me about what I have experienced of all of you is that you found something beyond those definitions, the John Wayne definitions of the indomitable American. You and CAG, for instance, were in concert, it seems, in my readings, that the code of conduct needed to be understood in a different light. That the conditions on the ground, you were losing your men, and you needed them to be able to fight. Not to defeat, because your conditions weren't going to allow you to defeat the Vietnamese, but you waged on a daily basis, and you, perhaps most of all, a battle behind bars. Speak to me about the battle behind bars and the recovery from that abject feeling of failure that the Vietnamese were able to enforce in so many ways on so many of your fellow prisoners.
We could spend a semester commenting on that introduction. We actually won that war 3 different times, and our political leadership was too stupid to realize it. Even the Vietnamese realized that they couldn't win on the field of battle. We were told, in fact, many of us were told the same thing I was. In Stratton, we have no intention of trying to defeat America on the field of battle. To the contrary, we're going to make friends with every dissident in your country and every enemy your country has, and they are going to force you to leave Vietnam, and then we will work our will. We will become the second Japan of Asia. And that's exactly what happened. The more you read their internal writings and their struggles with their so-called revolution and what they were trying to do and how they accomplished their objectives, it was not on the field of battle, and that was the failure of Mr. Johnson and Mr. McNamara. Actually, Mr. Kennedy, who started the whole bloody thing. They did not understand the enemy, and they did not understand the war. Now, the way we were fighting the war was we always seemed to fight the last war. You know, World War I, they were fighting Napoleon's tactics. They were like a bunch of aborigines confronted with a screw for the first time and extract it with a claw hammer. And they keep building bigger wedges and bigger hammers and sledgehammers, and they don't have brains enough to figure out maybe we need a screwdriver. And we kind of went into the military. In all fairness, we did. I went through survival school, taught how to survive in the Korean War environment. And of course, it was entirely different. The Vietnamese recognized that we didn't have very much military information. They didn't need it because they were getting it from their friends here in the United States, and Aviation Week, we affectionately called Aviation Leak, gave them more information. That's where we were getting our information, and they certainly had a subscription too. So they were interested in the next target, and we didn't know it, as you point out. Those targets that meant anything were issued from the basement of the White House. Even our leaders didn't know it until the night before the raids. So what they were after was one of the challenges that CAG Stockdale had to figure out. What are these guys after? And he was astute enough to realize that they weren't after military, they were after propaganda. They were going to exploit us for propaganda because that was the way they were going to defeat the United States of America. And that is how they defeated the United States of America. As I said, we won the war 3 times and we're too stupid to figure it out. So, faced with that scenario, you turn around and you end up with the immediate situation is you're tortured. And you go in and are taught name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. Let's pause for a minute and think of how stupid that is. Obviously, you figured out I'm from Boston by now. You carry more information on you. The name of the ship, the name of the guy that packed the parachute, the name of the squadron that you're in, your name tag has information on it, your ID card, your payroll signature, all kinds of information. So right away, the code of conduct is a non-starter. It is, and I maintain to this day, a very stupid document. It was a knee-jerk reaction to a situation we had never confronted before in Korea of 22 people staying behind. And it contradicts itself right within itself. It says, I'll resist as long as I have the means to exist. Well, I was taught boxing and judo and all that, so you would expect that I would be in hand-to-hand combat after they plucked me out of the tree, and then obviously they would have killed me if I had done it properly. I wasn't that good at judo. So the next statement says, and when I become a prisoner. Well, that right there is contradictory. Why are you talking about if I'm supposed to die like a man? What do you do? And of course, CAG, smart enough to turn around and say, look at your oath of office, look at your enlistment contract. Suicide isn't in there. Like and love isn't in there, so you don't play politics. But suicide isn't in there either. And you have to figure out what it is they want. And this is straight from CAG. Figure out what they want and deny it to them. That is your battle every day. Every waking minute of the day, you are at war with these people as long as you're here. What do they want? Deny it to them. And that, of course, works against you occasionally. For example, they come out, food was short. Well, like I say, we were winning the war. Everybody was starving, and all of a sudden, it looked like we might go home, so they started serving duck's eggs, and they didn't know if Americans like duck's eggs. Well, I've never had one. I don't know whether I like a duck's egg or not. But they decided they'd experiment with a couple of cells and hand it to the gringos and see what they did with them. Well, they made a mistake of going into a cell with Jack Fellows and some of the other guys whose resistance posture was to kick the enemy in the balls every day and get beat up, and that was a successful day for them. And they were just a cell of bad boys. That was the way. They lived in anger, and they survived in anger. So they hand them the duck's eggs, and they pick the eggs up. Did anyone else get them? No. Smash in the guard's face. Well, of course, they got beat up for the day, and that accomplished their objective. But, of course, the Vietnamese turned around and said, I guess Americans don't like duck eggs. So it was months before we ever got a supplement to our diet. But once again, they were following. What do they want? They want to suborn you in some way with more and better food to get you to do something. And you don't take the extra food, not unless everybody else is getting it. They want you to make a statement. You will make a statement for them. Nels Tanner gave a confession, and it told about all of the mutiny on his ship, and every name he gave from the CEO on down was a comic book character. And it made, this confession was presented in Sweden at some pacifist conference, and they were laughed out of the hall because most of the reporters from Europe were familiar with American comics and stuff like that, and they had been had. So this is how you learn to change gears. And there was a war going on that we had a part in, and we could win it if we put our minds to it. And we simply had to redefine the targets. So we couldn't wait for it to come from the basement of the White House. It had to come from our own head because we would be in solitary isolation. And the obligation didn't exist because CAG told us what to do. CAG never micromanaged us. He told us the goal, the ultimate goal. He left details. He never micromanaged. The details, you guys figure it out. Get in their skivvy shorts every day. And that was the battle. And once we figured that out, once we got past that code of conduct, the only time I even thought of suicide, and I don't think I'd ever have the guts to do it, was after I was broken, gave more than name, rank, serial number, and as you said, put in solitary confinement. And what saved me, I was lucky. I met a guy by the name of Paul Galante, and he tapped up on the wall. And he says, when they torture you and you break, don't feel bad. It's happened to all of us. And right away, that relieved the burden, as you mentioned, Reed McCrary. A year and a half before he got absolution, I got mine within 10 days from Paul Galante. So get that garbage out of the way, and you're earning your pay, full pay and allowances. It was our families that suffered in that war. We had a ball. All we had to do was follow our leader, Robbie Reiser and Jim Stockdale, CAG. They were the greatest guys in the world, and they wouldn't lead us wrong. And we were getting paid, full pay and allowances. Can you imagine that, for having a ball?
You're the first former POW to describe it as having a ball.
I did. I enjoyed sticking it to them because they stuck it to me. they pushed me out in front of that gang, that press conference in Hanoi and downtown Hanoi, and I just never forgive them for that.
Let's talk about that moment because it's iconic, and in many ways it was up until that photograph was published. The United States didn't have any real proof. They had suspicions and they had a lot of information saying that torture was going on and everything else, but in terms of being able to take an image and show it to the world and say, this is what we know is going on. Until you did that incident, if you would, could you describe that oh, yeah.
I'm gonna adjust the brightness of the blinds.
Okay.
Excuse
And
me.
also, is that your chair that's doing that?
I think it's the floor, when I lean back and forth to dolly, but I'll try to not do that. Okay, let me, I'm gonna tighten this up a little bit to darken the background a little bit. That probably is better, right?
Yeah.
It was very hot behind him. Sorry to interrupt.
I guess this is my log. I'm good.
Are you so good? Let me see how we did here. Yeah, that's much better.
A little bit bright. Let me just check exposure.
The sun keeps moving.
Yeah, we have to adjust this time.
Sorry, sir.
Well, I forget who it was in the Bible made the sun stop, and
Yes.
as long as his hands were up, the Jews were winning and the sun stopped in the sky. I could sit here with my hands in the air.
All right. Okay, I'm set.
All right, so let's talk about that incident. What led to it and what was going through your mind? Did you plan it out or did it occur to you as you came in? What, if you could?
Well, the first thing to fall apart in any war is the disintegration of a plan. I don't care whether it's a flight plan, a battle plan, strategy, tactics, or whatever. So I'm a firm believer, and a lot of that is from CAG, is you don't seize the day, you seize the moment. There's a moment when you can make a difference. What you do or what you don't do or whatever, you're in control of for just a second. If you're smart enough to keep your mind alert, situational awareness, you can spot that moment and you can exploit it. And what happened to me was I was the first guy shot down after the peace feelers in Poland fell apart. For a year in the background, an Italian and Polish diplomat were trying to get together a meeting of the North Vietnamese and the Americans, secret meeting, and they had arranged to do it in Warsaw after about a year. I found this out just last year, by the way. And it fell apart. And nobody really, to this day, knows why it fell apart. The excuse used was Ho Chi Minh said that we had bombed Hanoi. We had bombed the district of Hanoi, but not the city of Hanoi. And, you know, politicians lie, and that's the way it goes. So Johnson says, we didn't bomb the city of Hanoi. And Ho Chi Minh says, you did bomb the district of Hanoi, but they're just saying Hanoi. Both of them are speaking the truth, but both of them are lying and using this as an excuse to knock off. Because you broke your word and started bombing the sacred city, we're not going to talk to you. What they had really done is they had made a decision they would go with the Tet Offensive and try to destroy us down south and not bother talking their way into peace. But now it's a classic with that culture is everybody needs somebody to blame. But they have about 4,000 years of experience in doing this professionally there in Indochina. So they had to come up with people to blame. And it was Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson was a liar. And as a matter of fact, he was. We know that from his own writings and stuff. But you don't say that in an enemy capital. And we, in fact, bombed the district and not the city. I didn't bomb. My plane fell apart that day. plans fall apart as soon as they start. See, my plane wouldn't work, and I had to go back to the ship. So I wasn't even in the air that day for that one. But I looked like their cartoon ideal of the ugly American Yankee air pirate. I had a crew cut, a big nose, loud mouth, pot-bellied, ding-toed, knock-kneed, and I just fit it. And I was an attack pilot to boot. And so they were going to have me confess to bombing Hanoi. Well, it's hard to confess to something you didn't do. That you didn't even fly the mission, so you don't even know what happened. And not to worry, because all they do is get you to talk a little bit. And they had a guy who ended up reading our names as we were released. That guy, the rabbit, is writing things down, and he is composing my confession. So after about, I'm not conscious this is going on. They're just getting me, write this, write that, write a paragraph here, there. No, I won't beat you up. Yes, you will. And it was all garbage. But they were figuring out how I wrote and what my sentence structure was and stuff like that. So they showed me one day and said, "What do you think of this?" And I read it, and this was my confession. And it was hilarious. They had the A-4 carrying more tonnage of weapons than a B-52 could. And of course, that's our largest bomber, and I was flying the world's smallest bomber. They had us chasing pregnant women up and down the streets from 10,000 feet. I can hardly tell the sex of a person, let alone whether she's pregnant or not. She probably doesn't know whether she's pregnant. Bombing dikes and dams. Well, there's no water behind them. Why would I bomb a dike and dam? We're having a drought. I mean, this kind of inconsistencies. Of course, it made no difference because this was for the third world. They were going to muster all our enemies and all of the dissidents in the country, give them something to work with. And here's this heinous war crime of I am out there in an A4 purposely, bombing churches and pagodas and dikes and dams and chasing pregnant women and all this kind of stuff. And I looked at it and I just burst out laughing. And I said, "This is stupid." And he says, "No." He says, "You're going to give this to a group in a soccer stadium. You're going to stand up and you're going to do that." And that's not going to happen. I said, "I speak 5 languages. I'll get up there and I will say in 5 languages that I've been tortured and I've been this, that, and the other." And like I say, politicians lie. Well, not quite a lie. I mean, I took Greek and I flunked Greek. I took Latin and the seminary for 6 years. I could remember some of that. I took Spanish in high school and I flunked that, and French in college. So I get 5 in English, so I had 5 languages. I wasn't lying. Of course, they thought about that and said, "Well, you're going to tape record it." Well, all of this, there's coercion in between. All of this is step by step. That's understood. And so they get me to do it, and I figure, well, I used to belong to Toastmasters, and I observed and learned to counter almost every mistake you could make in speaking. And in the seminary, you were trained to preach sermons and by basically the best preacher you had in the order type of stuff. So I'm figure I can really ruin a tape. I can make it so flat and mispronounced, horseshit min for Ho Chi Minh, and just enough of that going on. So they got me to record it, and one day I'm sitting there, and they throw in a couple of sweatshirts, which was cold, and I don't know what it was for, and I put them on, and they go, "This means get into the striped uniform, long sleeves. Get dressed up." Well, an interrogation of some kind, and it's still cold out, so I dress like that, and bayonet up the butt, and out I go in the back of a weapons carrier, and I don't know what's going on. And blindfolded, apparently taken someplace downtown, and they had a press conference for the diplomatic corps. I found out this later. And they had a guy on contract for Life magazine by the name of Lee Lockwood, who was around taking pictures of North Vietnam. They, in fact, took his cameras, took the pictures, and handed him back his cameras, and then said, "You're going to stay for 2 more days. We got a treat for you." So the only pictures he took was a picture of me in downtown Hanoi that he himself took. And they put me in a sort of, I guess, a green room off to the side of the stage, a holding area. And from one side of the stage, they're playing the tape recording. I'm on the other side, and there's a table with a bunch of Vietnamese commies sitting there speaking to the group. And they're listening to the tape, and I hear the tape, and I realize people back home would recognize this as stupid. The material and the voice and the inflections and the double talk and that would recognize, but the rest of these people out here, they'd never recognize it. And I was told, you will go out and you will give a bow. They had us bowing instead of saluting. You will give a bow to the head table, and you will bow to the audience, and you will not say a word in your 5 languages. And that's seizing the moment. What do? I said, that tape is never going to cut it. The flat tape is never going to cut it. The stupidity of the confession is never going to cut it. I got to do something. And I took a look out there, and I just said, flash in the mind, Manchurian Candidate. And I'm saying to myself, I've been drugged, I've been brainwashed. I will play the puppet. So I go out and I bow to the head table, profound bow, and I bow to the audience, and Numbnuts, my guard, is off to the side, and I bow to him. And then I bow to the back wall, invented mooning in Hanoi, and stood up, and God love Numbnuts. He yells out, "Bow!" So I box the compass again. They get the hook and they haul me off. And next thing I know, I'm back. This was at the zoo prison camp. I'm back at the zoo in the interrogation room, figuring, here I am, I'm going to be back in the ropes again, one more time. And Rabbit comes in and says, "You did not bow prettily like we told you to. Now, explain yourself." And I said, once again, seize the moment. I said, I was afraid. I'm afraid of cameras. You didn't tell me there were cameras there. Well, the Montagnard people are animists, and they think if you take the picture, you've taken their soul, and they don't like cameras. And the Vietnamese are used to it. They despise the Montagnards, but they are used to that there are peasants that don't like cameras. So that registered, and so I said, so I reverted back to my ancient Roman Catholic custom of doing a profound bow, which Catholics think is pretty. And they have about 1 million Catholics left in Hanoi, and they realize, they're all a bunch of nuts. And so they all that registered and said, we picked a dumb peasant who didn't like cameras, and it was a stupid Catholic to boot and did this. We booted it, and back to your cell while they figured out what they were going to do. Well, somebody was smart enough to say, where's the confession? They had handed out a mimeograph thing. It was never in my handwriting. They had me at bayonet point all that night, writing in my own handwriting their confession. Lee Lockwood, when he came back to the States, had the decency to at least make the observation when Life put a full page of the picture there, that there's something wrong over there. And I'll give him credit. I met him in New York after the war, but anyway, that's a whole other incident. But that was the story behind that bowing picture, and it embarrassed the State Department, and it corked off the Defense Department. The Defense Department was telling our wives, don't tell anybody that your husband's a prisoner, don't admit that there's prisoners, or, think bad things are going to happen to you and your children and all this kind of stuff. And they were angry. They wanted the prisoner issue suppressed, but that was hard to suppress, that picture. And the State Department didn't want to deal with it. That was one more complication in trying to deal with them. They'll just write them off. The whole mess of French prisoners never came back from Dien Bien Phu. The whole mess of them just disappeared. So they didn't want to touch that. So it became an issue. In fact, it's listed officially, I think, is for tags, is the Stratton incident. So Averill Harriman's trying to explain it. They're doing terrible things over there, so the observation that this is the first thing that really generated it for publicity is right. But that was the beauty of not only seizing the day, but seizing the moment. And I didn't know whether it was going to kill me or not, but I credit that whole thing with bringing me home alive, because I was marked. A few of us still retain the marks on our body of the ropes that they put us in and stuff like that. And it would have been very convenient for me to have been killed, or to let me die, or just not release me at the end. But all that publicity, I think, sort of forced the issue. And my wife finally figured out that I was alive. Now she didn't know whether I was an animal, mineral, or vegetable, but she knew that I was alive. So it was a mixed blessing.
And it's fair to say that all of your actions were not always interpreted by some of your former fellow POWs in the light in which you acted. Like, in other words, you had to sustain in your courage and your vision of the forms of resistance that you could do, not just in the face of sometimes the punishment from the Vietnamese, but the doubts of your own fellow POWs who were equally struggling. As an SRO, as a leader, can you speak to that, and can you speak to the ways in which you helped those who were struggling with you and weren't always interpreted or seen in the most honest light by other POWs?
Well, that's a very complicated situation, and continued to the very last day that we were in jail, in terms of resistance posture. What is the correct resistance posture? There never was any doubt in Jim Stockdale's mind about the battle, the resistance posture, what you had to do and stuff like that. But there were people junior to him but senior to us who had their own vision, either to make up for their lack, then they would be super aggressive to make up for their perceived failure. We had people that didn't even try and betrayed us. We had people who were best survival was to criticize other people, so no one would focus on them. All of these personality traits, and you try to orchestrate that by tapping on a wall or by hand spelling code is extremely difficult. I was in a position where, as a lieutenant commander, when I was shot down, it's one of the more, major and lieutenant commander is one of the most useless grades in the system. You're not quite a junior officer anymore, and you're certainly not a senior officer, and you're treated that way by both communities. But you're a wonderful fall guy if you need to blame somebody. And it's a ritual of passage I think you have to go through, but it's useless. The best rank in the Navy is lieutenant, a captain. You have all of the authority, none of the responsibility. That's all the flight time too. You get all the time on the flight schedule. So I'm in this mid-grade. Well, the seniors would come in, the Vietnamese would recognize leadership of any kind, particularly by rank, immediately cut it off, take a senior into the camp, isolate him, put him in solitary. You could always reach a guy in solitary, but then they'd isolate him, which made it even worse. So you couldn't really take over, even though you were the next senior down, because he's still there, and you're undermining and undercutting him, and you're destroying his psyche by saying he's useless. So you always maintain, he is the senior ranking officer, and I am the acting. So I was never a senior ranking officer. It's always the acting, always a bridesmaid, never a bride, okay? Always an acting. Well, I'm a good actor, so I could come up, and my duty was to pass the word that Paul Galante passed to me from Jim Stockdale. This is before I ever met Stockdale in the prison system, was to take Stockdale and Reisner, passed to me that way. These are the two senior ranking officers. Here's their rules. Here's what you'll do. And pass that on. And what gave me credibility was that I wasn't saying it for myself. I wasn't saying it, I am the senior ranking officer, because they'd turn around and say, you're the SOB that bowed. You're the guy that gave more than name, rank, serial number. You're a wimp. You're a traitor. There wasn't any of that. I was just a guy tapping on the wall or signing and saying, CAG says. And you could go and pass the message on, and somebody else would say, well, Denton says, or Mulligan says, this or that. And I'd say, know them. Don't know them. I know CAG. CAG says, CAG senior ranking officer, he says this, and just repeat and repeat. And eventually it gets through. And of course, one of the messages was everybody up until 69, 95% of us were tortured. And no matter what anybody says, 95% of us were broken. And CAG says, no, you weren't broken, you were bent. Because the people that betrayed us were never tortured. So you couldn't turn around and say you were tortured and therefore you were turned into a traitor. Actually, that was the worst thing that they ever did. If you want to pause and take a look and say, what was the mistake that they made, the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese communists, in dealing with prisoners of war, it was they tortured us. They should have given us the Geneva Conventions. They probably would have converted half of us, because they had a good party line. I mean, they had developed a great party line. You know, we took your Declaration of Independence when we became independent, and we this, that. Ho Chi Minh is the George Washington of our nation. The CIA came in World War II into the jungles and saved, which is true, saved Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was CIA's candidate for running an independent Vietnam. I mean, so it was a great line, a great story. But as an aside, CAG and I had an advantage. I was CAG's numerical relief at Stanford for the 2 years at Stanford. So I had 3 hours sort of passing in the night. He's passing me the word. He's packing up and cleaning out his desk and packing things. He's basically changed the command. I got his seat, so I had the next 2 years of the seat. So we had the same education there. So we had a good idea, international relations program. We had an advantage over many a prisoner because, and in fact, we were smarter than Kennedy and Johnson. We understood the people there better than most of the people in the swamp in Washington did, because it was part of our study and how to think things out and what was going on and all that sort of stuff. So it was easy for me to interpret CAG to people because I had met him, I knew him, and I knew where he was coming from. And he turned around saying, you weren't broken, you were bent. And some people, it will take longer to come back to battery than others. So your job is to stay with them and encourage them, not to berate them, not to chew them out. You know, the stuff that people were dumping on me, that wasn't CAG's way. Turn around, yeah, you traitor, you're this. I remember going one place, the last time I was beaten up was income tax day in 1970. And they moved me immediately to another camp. And I got in there, and one of the things they had you do to ensure you're broken, you read the camp news on a tape recorder. So I came into the new place and read it, and you screw it up and all that type of stuff. And a message comes down from the senior ranking officer of Vegas, the part of Wallow. I'm the senior ranking officer. And there's no torture. There's no beatings here. And of course, here I am. I got my roommate counted them, 42 stripes from the top of my head down across my ass down to my ankles. So bamboo can do a good job on you. Wait a minute, it doesn't compute. Your credibility is gone when you communicate that. And of course, that was definitely not CAG's way of doing it. CAG understood because he had been through it. I think we figured he should have got something like 32 Purple Hearts. You're supposed to get, every time you get blood drawn or injured in combat, you're supposed to get a Purple Heart. So discrete different times that CAG was run back into the mill for us. And he understood that. And sometimes it takes you longer to get back to battery. And so your job is to support the guy and get him back.
Let me bring up, because you're right in the heart of something that is so important. Bill, do you need some hot water or anything?
I'm good. She gave me a lozenge.
Okay.
You want one?
I'm okay right now.
The hot water works the best, though.
So CAG, I have this. So, just finding a quote. Every different people seem to have, everybody good?
Yeah, just reducing the exposure a little bit.
Great, thank you. There's a variable MD here, you can just.
Good.
That's, this is the log, I'm not sure, I can put log on here, if that's better. And go to that. Now you should see log in
Oh,
that.
okay, perfect. Good, thanks.
Is that good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Let me find this quote. Are you okay? You need some water or use the restroom?
No, I'm doing it, okay.
Well, let me just say it in my own way. I'm sure you and CAG, when you were at Stanford, let me know when you're set, Bill. Talked about Epictetus.
Epictetus, yeah.
In the process of being broken down, first is the shock of being shot down. As I think it was Paul Galante said to me, until I hit the ground, I realized I didn't know what Vietnam smelled like. Like the reality. Charlie Plum talked about floating down in his parachute and hearing this pop, 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 and then realizing it was small arms fire. And some part of him was shocked, like, don't you know I'm an American pilot? Like, you're shooting at me. No, you don't shoot at me, I'm an officer. But reality was a whole different thing. Once you hit, as CAG said, when he landed, he left the world of technology and entered the world of Epictetus. So in this shocking change. Then you are then stripped of your sense of, perhaps the sense you were given of yourself many, many times untested. But now the real test came. Who are you really? And you're describing so beautifully, sir, the process and the evolution of finding that way. As you say, and this is so important for the military to understand, you have moments you can seize, you know, like that description of the bowing incident is such a perfect thing, because future officers, future leaders need to understand that thing that you just said. But an important other thing going on, and you talk about it, you're there for country, for family, for each other, is what is it that makes you tick? Ultimately, at the end, when you've had things stripped away, for CAG it was the essential self of Epictetus, the essential goodness. For another, they call it their faith in God. For another, it might be they cling to their wife's face and their children's faces when they can return, and you know. But whatever it is, we find this thing, this indefinable something that some may call the spiritual side of ourselves. That thing that we fight for that goes beyond just the obvious. We found something deeper. Can you speak to that, sir? Because that seems to be a process that so many of you went through. The ones of you who have thrived the most are the ones who found that.
Well, there's all kinds of buzzwords that go along with, you know, to thy own self be true, know thyself. He who knows himself does not have to fear the outcome of 100 battles. You know, going back into China philosophy. One of the things that is missing from the formation of our officer corps is a formal mandatory requirement that a young man or woman knows themselves. In the old days, we had stumbled into it in the old days that there was mandatory chapel and you marched off to it. If you weren't on watch, you were in chapel. You could sleep through it or do whatever, you do your homework, but everybody went to chapel. And now it's voluntary. There's an honor code, but then there's the wink of the eye. There's an honor code, but then we don't bilge on each other. So I don't lie and cheat and steal, and yet you can be using cocaine and I can't say a word because I'm bilging you. There's a dichotomy that we build into the system. We used to have when Bill Lawrence rewrote the honor code, he instilled life into it, where it became a part of their lives. And they all respected it. And if they violated it, they thought they had a reason for doing it, and they paid a price if they get caught. They realized there was accountability for every action that they took. And so much of it is, how clever can I be? How much can I get away with? And sometimes I take a look at the video game culture on how clever I am. You know, what level can I get to? What devious method can I get around something? And you start instilling a thought process that is not conducive to good order and discipline. We had an interesting situation at my observation there was a Naval Academy graduate was easier to lead than an Air Force Academy graduate. And the reason that I came to that conclusion was the Air Force Academy guys were there with their master's degrees, and they were too damn smart. So when they get an order, instead of saying, aye, aye, sir, they would say, why? And want to parse it and debate it and dice it and slice it. They'd end up doing what they were supposed to do. I'm not saying they were dishonorable people, but the process that they went through to get their butts in gear was torturous, especially if you're banging on the wall at the risk of your own butt getting caught communicating. And there was all the way in between. You had trouble sometimes with the enlisted guy was from an entirely different culture. And having spent a couple of years as an enlisted man, I understood that culture. They communicate on a different level. Their value system is good, is productive, but it's different. And how do you meld all these things together? And it was always a delight to get a Naval Academy guy because you tap on the wall and say, you know, roger that, aye, aye, Wilco. And then after a while he'd come back and say, what the hell are you doing this stupid thing for? I mean, the questions would come, but they'd come after, they'd implement whatever the hell it was, unless it was obviously illegal, immoral, or unjust. They'd go ahead and do it, and then they'd come back. Example, Jeremiah Denton was acting senior ranking officer. Jim Stockdale had taken himself out of the loop. He had been tortured and he was getting back to battery. And Jerry Denton orders us to fast. We're starving to death. I mean, I could run my hand down from my butt, just pop around the knee all the way down. I had to have been down around 110, 120 pounds. And at that time I was carrying about 180. We were starving to death. And this guy says, okay, we're going to show him, we're going to fast, like we were in the Maze prison and the press was outside and everybody was going to be praying for us or something like that. The Vietnamese loved it because the guards got more to eat. I mean, give me a break. Did we do it? Yeah. He says, fast, okay, throw the food back, and stuff like that. But on the wall saying, have you lost your ever-loving mind? Well, eventually we got that straightened out. But I mean, saying that you need that kind of under a stressful situation, you need to have that response. The sailor's response, the seagoing response. You see it more in aviation and submarines and on the bridge of a surface ship at night, that immediate response. You ask questions later, but if you're in charge, but you better be right. If you're given orders, you better be right in a situation like that. To personalize what you were asking about, I had an advantage. I really had an advantage that most of the guys in jail did not have. I was a member of a religious order, Oblates of Mary Immaculate, for 6 years, starting in high school, going through college. And halfway through that, we went through a novitiate, a year and a day of novitiate, where you were supposed to do internal soul searching and all that, find yourself and find out if this is the right track for you to go. And the staff was supposed to make it a little bit difficult for you. And we had a novice master by the name of Charlie Costello. And Charlie Costello was a piece of work. I mean, this guy was a born drill instructor. He had to have come out of his mother's womb with a drill instructor's hat on his head, honest to God. And a colossal pain in the butt. It doesn't sound very religious, but this is, that the head of our class was a bombardier from World War II who had lost his finger, his little finger in a raid over Germany and stuff like that. I mean, we weren't a bunch of just little kids. The spread of this class, novice class, was pretty wide and pretty smart bunch of guys. Example of Charlie and the novitiate. It snowed out one day. We're in Ipswich, Massachusetts, snow all over the ground. The garage is way down a hill from the house that we're living in. And the head of the class comes out and says, the priests are out in the car. They're going to have to come up the hill in the snow. We're going to shovel a walk for them and have it ready for them and stuff like that. Well, gets us out of the house and off our knees and off we're shoveling snow, having a ball. And the next day we have a chapter meeting there, and Charlie Costello sitting there, and he said, "Who shoveled the walk?" Well, of course, Eddie, the head of the class, I'm responsible. I did. "Who told you to?" I said, "No one." He said, "Put the snow back." And of course, whatever, aye, aye, sir. So the whole class gets out there with it, and you're talking about a walk that went almost 100 yards down the hill. I mean, this is a lot of work. So we're out there, and we go to Eddie, the head of the class, say, "Why?" So he had the temerity to go. He said, "Why?" He says, "My bedroom overlooks that hill, and you destroyed the beautiful view." Well, living in a situation like that and surviving at boot camp, if you can survive boot camp, where you all meld together, different people, whether it's a hate figure or a love figure that's up there that draws you together, it does something for you. And if you have learned that the hard way, shoveling snow, back on a walk, it's easier to absorb something that happens like falling out of the sky in the enemy country. Went to Stanford, studied international relations, studied the situation in Southeast Asia, the history of it. I knew their propaganda better than they did when I landed, so that was no surprise. I went to survival school twice. They lost the records the first time, so they made me go through twice. Broke my eardrum both times. Third class petty officer, didn't like me. Parachute rigger instructor, whacks and boxes me across the ear, breaks the eardrum. Go back through. No, you haven't. Officer and gentleman, I mean, my word, I've been through it. No, you go back through it again. So I went back through it again. Same guy's there, first class this time. Still doesn't like me. Whacks me across the ear, breaks the eardrum. Vietnamese, whack me across the ear, break the eardrum. Been there, done that. Go through survival school the whole 9 yards and in boxes and have people whacking you and running around and stuff like that to end up in your undershorts in a Vietnam. Been there, done that. An awful lot of what the Navy did, intentionally or unintentionally, accidentally or not, was good prep if you listened. So yeah, there were people, I remember a number of people said, "But I'm an officer. You can't torture me, I'm an officer." "Oh, okay, you can torture me because I'm an aviation cadet, or I'm a private first class, it's okay to torture me." So yeah, there was kind of a mentality, but there are perfume princes that prance through, and they think they're untouchable, and I'm not saying anything against Charlie Plum, but I'm just saying people end up surprised. I wasn't surprised. I was surprised that they were missing. How could they be that bad? And then finally I saw the weapons they were using, and it's a wonder they didn't kill themselves. Stuff left over from the Spanish-American War or something. So I ended up not being that surprised about their culture or about running around in my skivvy shorts by being beaten up. I mean, a lot of people, I know I was in grammar school, I had to fight my way to survival in grammar school. It was 5th grade before I had established my dominance and could go without getting whacked in the head. And if people have grown up that way, then they're kind of used to it. So the variety of experience prior to prison has an awful lot to do with it. And this is what I'm talking about: knowing yourself. Having a faith is a real practical thing. Feel sorry for yourself. Okay, here I am. I'm bleeding here, there, and all that. I can't raise my hands because holes in the back of my wrist. And I'm here like that, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. And then you turn around and, God, what the hell do you do this to me for? And then you pause about halfway through and say, He's been crucified. Yeah, how would you like to be hanging from a cross right now? I say, I ain't hanging from a cross. I'm better off. Take a look around. Say, Alvarez has been here for 2 years and he's still laughing and scratching. You know?
That's a good, really good point. Sometimes when the going would really get tough, speak to me about the role that others would play in encouraging you. Like in that moment, seeing Alvarez, remembering your wife saying to you, don't you dare, those things that keep us going when we want to give up. How do we find ourselves in those? And speak to me, if you will, about the bond. As Al Carpenter said, you know, the myth is that we go to fight wars for our country and everything else, but when you actually get into the thick of it, you're fighting for each other. You know each other has your back and you have their back. The bond between brothers, the bond between military people when they're faced with a common foe is something almost indescribable.
If you're from carrier aviation, you have a particularly good heads up on understanding the bonding. When you stop and think about it, when I'm catapulted off the front end of a ship, my life depends on 23 people having done their job perfectly. From the time that I salute and put my hands down like this and the airplane is then flying, I am totally out of control. Any one of those people misperforming their job can kill me into the water. From the sailor on the steam catapult, the catapult officer, and it's just one of those things that you learn that. Airborne, if you're my wingman and I crash into a mountain, the last thing I expect to hear is you crashing right next to me. It's a given. I know that my last sound is not going to be my wife's words, this, that. It's going to be my wingman. It's going to be right there. You talk about, I got your back. And the young guy that pre-flights the airplane and makes sure that it's all put together right has your life in his hands, and you trust him. You go around, do a visual walk around the aircraft and stuff like that, but this guy's been up for 2 or 3 hours already. He has his butt in the air and his head down on the engine, making sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And the ordnanceman hanging ordnance on your airplane, you make one mistake there, and it's not the ordnanceman's fault that my rockets blew up. It's McNamara's fault. They were built back in the end of World War II in Korea, and he was still giving us World War II equipment. It wasn't the kid's fault, but the kid, if he had hung the bomb wrong or didn't put the safety wire in or something like that, he could have killed you. So you learn right away that you're not by yourself. You are with other people, and you have to trust them because you can't survive without it, and they don't let you down. And when you get into a prison situation, Paul Galati was risking his life trying to communicate with me. In fact, he was gone the next day. They had pulled him out someplace else, and I didn't meet him until the end of the war. But he was yelling out a window as if he was talking to his cellmate, but actually he was talking to me down the line. And when they figured he was getting that communication, they got him out of there. He paid a price for leading. But then he completely turned me around from suicidal ideation, if you will, to turning around and saying, hey, I'm here, I got a leader, I got a job to do, and I got to learn the tap code, I got to do this, that, and the other, and right back to battery again. And I mentioned the last time that I got beaten up in 1970. I had a cellmate there, Igor Webb. Igor was a Hungarian, 6'3" or 4". I mean, he was a monster of a guy, and imagine when he was well fed what he was like, how they ever put him in an airplane. But no sympathy, just clinically counting, well, let's count the stripes. I mean, this is a guy that got your back. This is your wingman. He's not going to give you phony sympathy. So what? You know, I feel sorry for you. Well, why not feel sorry for everybody else in jail, for God's sakes? You know, feel sorry for the Vietnamese people that are being subdued by these commies. You know, they're practical. Here we are, another day at the workshop, count them up. Well, you didn't get a record, but that's all right, and type of stuff. But that's the kind of thing that keeps you going. Because they're there. They don't even have to say anything. It's sort of like your wife. She's there. You don't have to do a lot of talking and all that kind of stuff. I knew she'd be there when I came home. Some weren't. I knew mine would be. That gives you strength. I didn't have to worry about. We had talked about it. We put a pitcher of martini down on the table. One new lieutenant commander in every squadron was going to be dead or captured, coming out of Lemoore at the time we went through. I looked around, there were 2 new lieutenant commanders in my squadron, so either me or he wasn't coming back. And knowing my luck, I put a pitcher of martinis down there, and we talked about where she would move to, what schools kids would go to and stuff like that, because we knew it was going to be a long war. And never had to worry about it. Everything was, as she said, you came home just as far as we planned. You came back on time to pick up the plan again. But that kind of a dependability you have from your shipmates and type of stuff. You went through the same training together, there's a bond there. Bill has a pilot's license. I have a pilot's license. There's a bond. You don't have a pilot's license, do you? There's a bond that's between he and I. We just haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. But we all went through the same flight training, and we all been through combat. And in the early days, all of us had been tortured. And this commonality of experience sort of bonded together. And as Tag would occasionally say, ain't much, but who else you got? Putting things in perspective just helps so much to have somebody turn around and do that to you. I was complaining about something. I was always, a bitching sailor is a happy sailor, okay? Complaining sailor is a pain in the butt because he has no solutions. He's just a negative. But a bitching sailor always has a solution. It may be stupid, but there's no mutiny going on. And so I was bitching, and Keg says, Dick, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have been wearing a pair of wings. And I was complaining about prison. You shouldn't have been wearing a set of wings. And I stopped for a minute and thought about it and say, well, you know, I wanted the wings, and it comes with a package. And he just instantaneously puts things with a little bit of humor into perspective. And you always know you're going to get that from him. The dependability, predictability and dependability is what helps. And one of the things that he did was, of course, build that into a system. We ran our own plan of the day. The Gooks ran theirs, which we had to go along with, but we also were running ours. This is when you'll communicate. You know, this is when you'll sleep. This is when you'll do this. This is how you'll set up seniority. We had just routine, so we could predict where we were going. And like we talked earlier, is defining the mission. You can define it whatever way you want. So one guy came home, he betrayed us and went home early, and he says, I'm going to escape from here. He was telling Doug Hegdahl this. He says, I'm going to escape. And Doug says, how you going to do it? He said, I'm going to kiss their ass and they're going to let me go. And he did. And they let him go. But that was his plan.
Let's talk about Cag Stockton a little bit. Clearly you two were close and you have a lot of respect for him. Okay, Bill?
Yeah, I just want to check the exposure.
Yeah,
The
let's,
lighting level's gone down.
yeah, let's keep
Excuse me. Okay. just a reference for a color slater.
You're at 5,600, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. You set?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about some of the things you learned from CAG and about the way that he led.
Well, I was close to CAG in spirit more than close to CAG either physically or in friendship. Like I say, he gave me my survival tips for 2 years at Stanford, how to matriculate, how to survive. 2 years of that interesting thing, and he was absolutely right. So he built credibility in that 3 hours I had with him in 1962. 3 hours, and he said Stockdale meant this, and fixed in your mind. And of course, read about him in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and then next thing I hear, third time, the next thing I hear is from Paul Galati in jail in January of 1967. So there's all this gap, and now it's CAG says. It wasn't until 1970 that I was in the same cell with him, a group of people, eyeball to eyeball, and talk about disappointment. Turn around and I went, "Hi, CAG, I remember me and this, that, and the other." And he looked and you remember Stanford, this, that, and the other. And he looked, no. You talk about being crushed. I mean, built this guy, particularly once in prison, built him into this idol, and saying, "I know this guy. This is my buddy. This is a." And I don't know. Don't remember you at all. So anyway, so I'm not making any claims for great friendship. A lot of respect, and over the years, when he was at the War College and various teaching his course and various other exposures, we certainly were friendly, but I really can't claim, to my sadness, can't claim that I had him as a friend. We just never had that opportunity. And of course, there was the rank difference. Once he got flag ranked, it was a whole different world. So I know more about Stockdale's ideas and serving under his command type of thing. And I certainly am intimately familiar with that, by people who fail by going against him or not listening to him.
Let me point out something here, is that I've heard this theme before. It's actually really interesting that men who would feel intimately involved in Stockdale's leadership and then almost find themselves surprised when they finally meet him that they don't know each other. And which says to me that there was something about Stockdale, you felt close to his ideas. There's some way in which his leadership included everybody, so that you felt like you were a part of it, even if you didn't know the guy. Is that fair to say?
Well, what you're talking about is charisma. You don't want to go as far and be blasphemous and say he's Christ-like, but damn near Christ-like. The idea of Stockdale is stronger than Stockdale himself. And the leader Stockdale that Stockdale built was bigger than the self. And they made a statue 9 feet tall of Robbie Reisner at the Air Force Academy. They should have made Stockdale's statue 9 feet tall, because that's the way it was. But just the ideas that grab you. He didn't confound you with bovine residue. He wasn't quoting philosophers, this, that, and the other, that eventually he did for the sake of the War College so that, accreditation boards could bow and scrape and all that kind of. He talked to his fellow sailors and his fellow aviators. He's trying to inspire people, tap on the wall. You're going to get tortured if you get caught. You're going to get tortured if you're caught leading. You can't get caught. You got to be brief, And he turns around and says, "Back U.S." And people turn around and say, "What do you mean, back U.S.?" Well, bow. Don't bow unless they make you bow. And so some people would take that literally and say, well, you got to not bow. Well, every time you didn't bow, you got a rifle butt across the back of the head and you bowed under the pressure of some law of physics, okay? Well, he's talking about you don't voluntarily become subservient. We don't bow to anybody. Physically, you may make me bow, but I'm saying up yours while I'm bowing. So it's not a pretty reverential bow. So I'm mooning you while I'm bowing to you. You can do it. But that's what Stockdale meant. But he gets all that with the B, back U.S. That type of stuff. And give you a good example of what grabs you with Stockdale and how it works. He says, you don't nag a repentant sinner to death. And what he was after, you were talking about earlier, was people are pinging on you. Stratton, you're a loser. Stratton, you wrote a confession. Stratton, you were in a picture. Stratton, you did. People are pinging on you left and right, nagging you. Huh? And like that's going to make me a better man. And that's where he came up with the thing, you do not nag a repentant sinner to death. Number two, sort of a companion, not number two, but companion to that is, if you've gone over to their side for whatever reason, voluntarily, helping them, assisting them, sucking up to go home early, betraying us, whatever, if you come back to us, even on the tarmac at Gialam Airport, you come back as one of us. Because it takes some people longer than others. So we had this Navy Commander Squadron skipper, and he got in with a couple of real loser senior officers who betrayed us, and he got suckered into it. And it was going along with it for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And all of a sudden, he started thinking about what CAG was saying and decided, I don't want any more of this. So he started stiffening his spine and refusing to cooperate with the gooks. So they said, well, we'll fix that. We'll throw him back into one of the cells, one of the worst cells, which was the one that rioted, that cell. We'll throw him back into that cell, and they'll eat him alive. So, sure enough, they throw him back in the cell. Well, he's the senior ranking officer of the cell by definition. The senior ranking officer of the cell was Larry Guarino, Lord rest his soul. I don't know if you've run across that name before or not. Larry Guarino was a teenage fighter pilot in World War II. He flew Spitfires in Italy. British stole our P-51s to escort their bombers and gave us Spitfires for Italy. And he got to fly Spitfires all during World War II. And then he flies in Korea. And then he flies in Vietnam. And he's still a major. Talk about promotion opportunities. Anyway, the commander walks in and he's the senior ranking officer. So back channel, they rap on the wall and say, by this time we have the Air Force colonels are online, what do you want to do? And the word came back, CAG says, he is your senior ranking officer. Treat him as such. And they did. The toughest, meanest, most obnoxious group of prisoners get this guy, and they did what he told them to do, and he did what CAG told him to do, and it worked out. And the Vietnamese were confounded. They expected that he would be torn limb from limb and thrown out through the bars. So everybody won. And CAG had the ability, even with that cell, and even with Larry Guarino, little Italian bantam rooster, everybody feels we're winners in this. And CAG put all that together. And that guy came home, and you don't know his name. I doubt it. I don't think you know his name. Oh, and you probably never heard of him. He's gone now, Lord rest his soul, but that's CAG. CAG did that. That's not somebody else. That's not the Navy Department. That's a CAG type of creation. And
When was the first time you heard the expression "return with honor," and what did it mean to you then? What did it come to mean over the years?
I don't know the origin of that. That's a good question. I have to ask that sometime around. First time I heard of it was after the so-called church riot. The dummies put all our seniors together, so they created the 4th Allied POW wing. I mean, sometimes these communists get so stupid, you have to laugh about it. And so that's where I heard this return with honor type of things. And what I think is these guys sat around, nothing else to do, and figure, well, we need a coat of arms, and they designed a coat of arms. Well, we need to have some kind of a saying, and so they agreed on that. I think that's kind of where it came from, but I'll have to ask the question on that. So they passed it down the line, and very frankly, it has come to mean more since our return than while we were there, because if you had, when you first say it to me, I turn around, what's the big deal? Of course. I mean, that's like go to the bathroom and brush your teeth. For God's sakes, give me a break. Return with honor. Don't bother coming back at all if you're not going to return with honor. I mean, that's kind of, it lacked, I don't think that CAG did that, okay? Because that's not a CAG motivational type of thing that grabs you. It's inspiring and it's nice, and it says a lot to me now, because it helps sum things up. What do you think you guys were doing? Well, we just wanted to come back with a measure of respect and honor, and it means something in freedom, but in prison it meant nothing. What are you talking about? Of course we come back with honor. We brush our teeth in the morning. God, get off it. But I have to admit it was clever, and it speaks.
When you, let's talk about, you're in your cell, and one day the cell door opens and a young 19-year-old seaman joins you. Tell me the story of Doug Hackett.
You don't have time for the whole story. You talk about giants in their own way. You're in boxer shorts and t-shirt, black boxer shorts, black t-shirt, and it's 100, 120 degrees. And if you only had enough water, you'd be sweating, but you don't have enough water to even sweat, but you sure do stink. And you haven't shaven for a month. You haven't had a haircut for probably 3 or 4, months. And you open the door and you don't know what's up. They never tell you anything. So, and this moose, and I taught you, this guy was big. The guy was bigger than I am. He was taller than I am, and he was healthier than I was. And he looked at me. My name is Seaman Apprentice Douglas Brent Hegdahl. What's yours, sir? Always remember those words. And I'm looking at it like, I can't believe this. So, regular Navy, I said, Dick Stratton, I'm Lieutenant Commander, off the Ticonderoga. And immediately, eyes go right in the back of his head. I learned help me with my kids too, because they start doing this too when I do something stupid. Later on, he told me, he says, all I could think of was, oh, cripes, another stupid officer. So they shove them in, and that's no explanation, no nothing. So you do the usual dump, you know, where you from, and this and that, and what ship, and this, that, and where'd you come from? And one of the first things you do is dump names. Well, that was a mistake. He had 246 names. That's a fine person. We'll do that later. Because he said them too quick, I couldn't even stay with him. But okay. But we wanted to make sure, because sometimes they'd pull him out, and if you didn't get his names from him, he'd be gone, and you'd lose an opportunity to add to the memory bank of the guys that were in prison or you thought were in prison, which was very important to us, because we didn't want to leave anybody behind, like happened in Korea. So we're trying to figure out, the next thing was trying to figure out why there's a juxtaposition of the two of us. Why would they take, they would keep an enlisted, all with enlisted, not mixing them with officers, unless they had to for some logistical reason. You know, why now? And we figured out that they're putting together potential early releasees. It could be the only reason for it. For some reason, they wanted to release in threes. There's some mysticism there that I never did figure out. And we used that to our advantage when we finally got dug out, because we realized they were going in threes. And they were down to two. They lost one out of that group, so we stuffed Doug into that. Got him to volunteer. That's how we got him out. So it was three. So we're waiting. We're probably going to get a third in this cell, and they're going to try to prep us up and get us out of there. Tried to figure that out. And so we got the work of the ship pretty well on the first day, getting lined up as to why are we there, the mission, you know, and what's the plan of the day, who are we in contact with, and if they pulled me out, how does he get contact, how was I get, at that time I was isolated, but I was in solitary, but I still was in contact through the heads, the latrine. I could do drops in the latrine and pick up stuff from guys. So we got that work of the ship out, and then spent the night trying to do names, and boy, I just didn't have the capacity. I could hold on to accurately probably about 24 names without screwing it up. But something was wrong with my head. I don't know what it is, but it still is today, as a matter of fact. So there was no chance of my memorizing all his names. So I figured, well, we'll do that a bite at a time. I'll add a name a day or something, and we'll pick that up. And then came about 2 or 3 months of an adventure of living with this guy. It was just an amazing guy.
Speak to me something about him. What set him apart?
Well, what set him apart, first of all, was that he was taking it, which it was for him, as a great adventure. Well, he's 19 years old. And after working him over initially and then finally labeling him, they had him confess to being the skipper of the Canberra. He writes this confession, skipper of the Canberra, and signs it Douglas Brent Hegdahl III, and he's not the third, and Captain USS Canberra, Seaman Apprentice, Douglas Brent Hegdahl III, Captain USS Canberra. And they had to teach him to write. I said, how did you survive this thing? so quick? How did you get through the machinery so quick and intact? And he said, I decided I was going to be a peasant and going to play dumb. And they believed it. And he said, in Vietnam, we figured out in Vietnam that a sign of wealth are water buffaloes. So they figured, enlisted, he's a peasant, so how many water buffalo does your father own? He said, none. He's a poor peasant. Well, rich peasants, they kill. You know, mid-grade peasants, they exploit and then kill. And the dumb peasants do all the work. And so they had him figured he's a dumb peasant. And so he said, in fact, their name for him was the incredibly stupid one. One day they came to me, I learned it by accident, and they said, Stratton, do you know the incredibly stupid one? And I said, no. And eventually they told me it was Hegdahl. That was their name for Hegdahl. So he played that up. And so they would just sort of move him around and try to see if they could exploit him by squealing on other people, and he was too stupid to squeal on people and all that kind of stuff. So he was playing the game to the nines. And of course, I was trying to figure out, well, maybe he is stupid. I better check this out. And because one day, Vietnamese would sleep for 2 hours in the afternoon to make the revolution go quicker, I guess. And it was good because that's when you would communicate and this and that. But I was in isolation. I didn't have people to communicate with. So I'd lay down, try and get some rest too. I'm laying down, and this guy is skipping around the center, a very small room, about this big, but he's skipping around the center between the two pads. Doug, what you doing? And he stops, looks at me, and he says, skipping, sir. And start. And I could see that. I said, Doug, what you doing that for? He looks at me and stops and says, you got anything better to do, sir? Skip, skip, skip. I didn't have anything better to do. Sitting there one day in the nap period, and we'd picked up a piece of brick. We used that for chalk, right on the floor. No paper, no pencils, no nothing. So we're sitting there, and we're getting a little bit bored, and he says, Dick, do you know the Gettysburg Address? Well, my God, I got 2 college degrees and all that kind of stuff. We ought to be able to figure that out. So you can regenerate. It's amazing what you can regenerate when you're in solitary and isolation, which is a whole other story. But we got it down pretty good. We got it, and it was race here and got it accurate. And we're looking at it and admiring our work. And he said, Dick, can you say the Gettysburg Address backwards? And of course, this is why I'm done. I think, have I got a mental giant here, or have I got a savant of some kind? And I'm saying, who the hell would want to know how to say the Gettysburg Address backwards? Even Lincoln wouldn't want that. And I said, no, Doug, I don't. And he says, well, I do. I said, I don't believe it. He says, I'll do it. I said, you track me on that. And so I'm tracking him, and by God, there he's saying the damn thing backwards, not missing a word. And I'm saying, I got a savant. He's not stupid. I got myself a savant. He got those names. Yeah, he remembered, a great, almost photographic memory. I said, this guy is a gold mine, because we got to get all the intelligence dumped into him, because if he's going to get sent home, we want him to go out as best we can get him, that type of stuff. But as an aside, the last time we saw Doug, Alice and I, was in 2010. We had gone to do our physicals down at Pensacola, and he went with us on that. And then we went to New Orleans on a side trip. And driving along, Alice remarked to him and said, Dick always uses that story about the Gettysburg Address, as an example of your steel trap mind and all that. Doug's sitting there and he's laughing. And I'm saying, what the hell are you laughing about? He says, I can't say it backwards. Who the hell would want to say it backwards? And I said, yeah, that was precisely my thought. I says, I heard you. I say it back. He says, I can't. He says, think about it. You're reading it, tracking me. I'm standing behind you. I'm reading it off the thing. You stupid officers, you never get the word.
Oh, that's too good. And he, in addition to memorizing these names, and Doug Hegdel is a prime example of great military leadership on your part. You see these unusual characteristics of this person, and you realize that there is a distinct advantage for your country and your military needs to also include this guy in the plans for early release. And it's again a moment of, an example of seizing the moment. Talk to me a little bit about, it seems like that kind of lateral awareness in the moment as part of military discipline is a very important thing. If I were to take you to a class of young midshipmen or cadets at West Point or anything else, what is the best piece of advice you can give to them in terms of that kind of how to best develop, or that lateral awareness to know in that moment, you know what, I'm gonna bow, that's what they're telling me to do, and I'm going to make it as robotic and accentuated as possible. That moment where you hear Doug recite all these names and you do this thing with the Gettysburg Address and you say, this is a intel gold mine. We gotta get this guy back. And you had to fight really hard to convince your senior ranks. So talk to me about that, because this is part of this battle behind bars that every person in the military can wage, whether they're in a prisoner of war camp or they're stationed at somewhere else. There's a common objective to accomplish, and every one of us are the assets to get there.
Well, where to start with? The situation on releases. The concept of releases are, we need a plan in case something is left up to us. And our plan, CAG being a sailor, is, women and children first. The captain's the last one to go, and he goes down with the ship if he has to. So it's seniority. The sick and injured first, and then by the most junior up to the senior. Well, of course, the State Department is a world in its own, okay? We can go on a lot about the State Department, but Mr. Kissinger decides it's the order of shoot down. So the first shot down is the first out. Well, that's a nice emotional type of a thought, and it's, I'm sure some liberal university would applaud that and say that's great, and it's stupid. That's going to potentially leave, the most junior man trying to run the place at the end. The senior one's the last one to go, gang, because it's a military outfit, and we're running a military outfit right down to the end. So this is, amongst ourselves, we build this system up. Then we get a few people in, we talk, the perfume princes prancing around, and, well, I'm an officer and I'm senior and I'm very valuable, so I should go. And then it's a matter, well, I've been here very long. You never heard it from Alvarez, and he was the first guy shot down and captured. Never heard it from him. You'd hear from some of the seniors. Well, I've been here for 7 years, and well, I've been here for 6 years and 2 months, and I've been here for, come on, give me a break type of stuff. But that we ran into a clash on that about release order, which is another story on when we talk about releases. So Doug is healthy, Doug is young. Doug is a seaman apprentice and has no intrinsic military training that is essential for the war effort. We have 1,000 seaman apprentice coming out every year at Great Lakes and all that type of stuff mentality. So you turn around and say, first of all, they're liable to send them whether we want them to go or not. We had no choice over the thing. But we need to have a sleeper prepared to go if any opportunity comes. Even if it is a helicopter flying over and they tell us, send us one up. You know, who are we going to pick? We kill each other all running for the rope at the same time. So who are we going to send up? We're going to have somebody groomed with most intelligence about the widest spread, the most names and everything else. And that's the one that's going up the rope or over the side or going to do it. So this is, we developed this type of a plan, and Doug turned out it'd be perfect. Plus, he was the most junior guy. Held up north, he was the most junior guy. So he fit right into the matrix. Who do we send? You know, women and children, sick and injured, and so of the healthy ones, he's the most junior. So that he was a logical pick for that. And so you run into rotating senior ranking officers, and they're isolated. So you have to try and communicate with them and say, have I got a deal for you? You talk about selling used cars or refrigerators to an Eskimo. You talk about a sales job. It's about, have I got a deal for you? Just what you need. And to do that tapping, punching holes in toilet paper and slipping it under the door and stuff like that is most difficult. But to get through this mental block about, well, Alvarez should be the first one to go because he was the first one shot down, or John McCain should be going because he's bedridden and he's broken and gutted, and we had 3 or 4 of those guys around. They're sick. They should go. You know, and you turn around and say, well, you know, they can't climb a rope. You know, we need a healthy. If we're planning all contingencies, we need a healthy one, and we need somebody who's a low profile, that they're not focusing on, all this kind of stuff. So it became a sales job, and you just sell it to one senior ranking officer, and then they pull him out and another one comes in. So you got to start all over again. You got to do the work of the ship and get all that set up, and then you have to start convincing him that this is a good idea. And we had a real solid one, and Hervey Stockman was the guy that okayed Doug and made the sale and said, tell him to go. And so I told him, I said, Doug, you're going to go. You're the next one to go. And he says, no, I'm not going. The best time of his life. He had the respect of every one of us in the jail. He was getting into their skivvies every day. I mean, he was dumping sand and gravel in the gas tanks of their trucks, and he was doing all kinds of crazy things. And he just having a great time. But what he really liked was he had the respect of all these GD officers. And he treasured that. And now we're going to send him home. I said, Seaman Apprentice Douglas Brent Hegdahl. This is Lieutenant Commander Richard A. Stratton giving you a direct military order. You will go home as long as you do not have to do anything to betray your country. You will go home. That's an order. And I think even to this day, I think he holds it against me. Oh, really, I do. And just things came together, and for whatever reason, they're trying to match up with peace groups coming in, and all kinds of weirdos were coming in, peace groups, using us as an excuse, because they're the only ones who can get letters from us, they're the only ones who can talk to us, and using that as an excuse to commit treason against their country. So they come over, give aid and comfort to the to the enemy, get us tortured to see them, to say we've been humanely and leniently treated, and they exchange a few letters. That did work, and they get the letters out and stuff like that. So they were trying to match people up with groups coming in. And I don't know the magic of it, but it was, Doug was there, and Doug was available, and Doug did what he was told, and I respect him for that. Because I don't know if I would have obeyed that order. I usually obey orders, but I don't know if someone ordered me to do that, that would be akin to telling me to kill one of my kids. So I got nothing but respect for him for biting the bullet on that. Probably more than I could have done. And sure, he did come out, and he had firsthand information on the torture sequence, how it was done, to which people it was done, the background story of the Bowing incident, the location of the Alcatraz, which was across from the plantation where we were, and various places around. He was able to verify that for the intelligence community and bring back all those names, most of whom we didn't have verification. So come back and you get promoted a couple of ranks for being prisoner. So they asked him, what do you want to be? I had asked him, I said, when you get your crow, what do you want to be? Petty officer what? He said, I always wanted to be a postal clerk. I said, who the hell would ever join the Navy to become a postal clerk? But he's a third-class petty officer postal clerk. Yes, so he wisely decided there really wasn't a future for postal clerks in the Navy. And he got out and he went to work at San Diego Survival School as an instructor and finished out his government service there as a civil servant.
There's, in many ways, the story of you and your fellow POWs from a classic sort of iconic view of literature is really a love story. The ways that you fought for each other and fought for your nation, your integrity. These are the acts of great love, great conviction, great commitment. Speak to me about love, about the brotherhood, the ways that you fought for each other, about that bond.
Well, first of all, you look and say, what did we have in common? And you have all kinds of savants saying, well, they survived because they were officers, they survived because they were pilots, they survived because they had pointed heads, whatever. And of course, these are all people who don't know what they're talking about. What we had in common was neighborhood, church, family, school, reinforcing common values. That's what we held in common. Even atheism is a religion. In fact, it's a more arduous religion than any of the others on the face of the earth. And eventually they figure out that that's anti-intellectual to be an atheist, because that means you know something. So to be an intellectual, you have to be an agnostic. And I don't meet any agnostics, but we had our atheists and animists, and we had all kinds of things there. So it didn't make any difference what variety of religion you had, but the people that survived and survived with class had some kind of a belief system. And what I usually equate it to when I'm talking to my juniors is that when you fly through a thunderstorm and survive it, when your ship digs into a rogue wave that's 50 feet tall and your ship comes out the other side, when when your submarine springs a leak and some seaman finds it and plugs it, and you come up, you realize there's something bigger than you out there. So that's all you need to acknowledge, that there's something out there and it's bigger than you. And you can dress it up with religion or whatever else you want to do, but that's a fundamental thing. People came from broken families as well as intact families, but they knew what a family was, and they knew what they were missing when it wasn't intact. They wished they had a father, or they had a father figure instead of a father there in the house, the same mother figure type of thing. So people had a sense of family before they ever came to the military type of thing. They grew up in a neighborhood where everybody looked out for each other. The neighborhood that I grew up in, you couldn't screw up at all because they'd be on the phone, your parents would know before you ever came home. And the cops would pick you up in a minute. And they didn't take you to the station, they brought you home. And the worst thing you ever wanted was the school to call your parent to go down and see the principal, because that was non-repetitive exercise. And that sense of neighborhood, all being in there together, reinforcing, helping you along, teaching you to ski, teaching you to skate, picking you up when you've fallen, when you had a broken arm and fell out of a tree or something like that. They pick you up, scrape you up, bring you home, put you back together, and restore your confidence and all that kind of an experience. Almost to a man, a sense of humor. Particularly, I mean, a real sense of humor, not to laugh at somebody else. I don't call that humor. That's sadistic. To laugh at yourself. And most of the guys had that. Like I tell you, boot camp, have that in common. Flight training. Every one of us has had an instructor that's been a screamer and an idiot. And everybody has had a godlike figure somewhere, a mentor or a rabbi of some kind that's helped them along and understood what that did and what that meant for them. See, the average, after they split us off and put the young men up in China and after the Sante raid and put us old fuds downtown, the average age of the guys downtown were 42 years old. I mean, the Air Force was bringing in ancient age people. I don't know where they found them. They'd kick a desk drawer and some guy would come out, hadn't flown for years, find him out in Germany someplace, and he'd do his tour over there. We had two guys that had been in prison before, one in World War II and one in Korea. They didn't get it right, so they sent him back to do it again. So this type of thing brings a body together that's used to flying together, grew up in an environment like that, and even though they may have forgotten it, it comes back to them when they're there, and the value of it, the intrinsic value of we either hang together or we hang separately. Let's if we're going down in flames, let's all do it together, and not showboating and stuff like that. So it's the roots of where you came from, and the job of the leadership is to pull it together. The genius of Stockdale, or anyone who wants to be a Stockdale type of a leader, is not only know yourself, but know your people. Because everyone out there has something you need or can use, something of value. They all have value as human beings. I'm talking about practical value for the work of the ship, whether it's prison or flying a squadron or driving a boat. Everyone on there, they may be a pain in the butt, they may be ex-convicts, God knows what they may be, but every one of them, if you're a smart leader, you'll recognize that they have something to contribute. It may even be a negative, but it will contribute to the mission and the good of the whole, and that's part of what I call, and you were addressing initially, is situational awareness of what's around you. It's not about you. You go in for command, your first job is to train your replacement, because you may be dead on the next hop. So that's your first job. And you got to train your wingman what you expect of him. And then once you get that done, then you got to look around and say, what do I have to work with? And don't turn around and say, well, this guy's a loser. You turn around and say, this guy's got something. He may be a loser, but he speaks French. and I'm going to need, since we're going to the Med, I'm going to need a French speaker. And you this is knowing your people, their strengths, you know their limitations. And this is the situational awareness. And it's hard to do in jail when you're in separate cells and isolated. How do I learn about you through a wall 3 bricks thick? But there's a way. You betray yourself. Like I say, I'm from Boston. You've got the accent. You betray yourself. And reliability. You can say, as soon as the gooks go down to sleep, you should be on wall communicating. Somebody should be clearing under the door and somebody should be on the wall. If you're on the wall on time, I can count on you. You know, you're unselfish, your duty, I can tell that from you right there without even seeing your face. But if it takes you 5 or 10 minutes to get your butt in gear, to get up on the wall and start rapping and stuff like that, I say, man, I can't rely on you. And so you say, this guy needs to be jacked up here, this guy needs that. What do I have to give him? Now, here's what they are. Why should they follow you? Why should they believe you? Not so much follow you. Why should they believe you? Are you a man of your word? Do you give a rat's ass about them? Do you care whether they get fed or they go to sleep? And do you care whether they get their mail? If you don't care about that, then you don't care about them at all. So what do you have? What can I do for these people? What do they need from me? What do I have to give them? And it may be discipline. This one needs a rap in the head. One of the things I like about the Jetro and the NCIS series, where he's always rapping the guy in the back of the head. Anyone he likes, give him a rap in the head. Some people need that. And you give it to them. But that's your job, to figure that out. And it's situational awareness. You learn it, of course, in the airplane. You keep your head on a swivel, because you're going to get it from behind. They're not going to hop you in front and wave to you, unless you're working Mr. McNamara's rules of engagement, where you fly by and say, hi, I'm going to shoot you down. I'm going, oh.
When you finish your career, your naval career, you, I believe, got a degree in social work. And my understanding is that one of the tasks you undertook was counseling people with addiction, people with a history of abuse. One of the things that you have spoken about, or as many have talked about, the healing power of getting on the wall, of sharing your story, sharing your pain. How did your experience in Vietnam inform your, because obviously the Navy and the military in general now are dealing with incidents of PTSD and trying to get our vets home and get them healthy, to get them to be able to reintegrate with a positive attitude about their possibilities and their experiences, as positive as possible. There's something you learned in the Hanoi prison systems that you learned on the wall as you were stripped down to just your boxers and defecating in front of each other in a slop bucket in a corner, and all the pretense was stripped away. And in that crucible, it seems that you were able to share your pain with each other, and that in many ways, when you came home, you could begin your lives because you had left the past behind. Can you speak to this, sir?
Well, part of the communicating with each other was operational necessity. So whether you liked the person or you didn't like him, it had nothing to do with it. You had to get, or talk about names. Who's first thing? Like Doug walked in, first question you noticed was, I'm a seaman, who are you? Who's senior? Who's the senior ranking officer, and how do you communicate? Those type of things go. Then the second part we were just talking about of what do you need from me and what do I need from you? What do I have to give you and what do you have to give me? Which means you have to share an experience. It doesn't make, if you have been through the ropes with the Vietnamese, our conversation is different than if it's with someone else who has not been through the ropes. Because there's so much is just given. I say the ropes and I don't have to explain very much more. To the others, I have to explain ropes. What are ropes? And then as you explain, it just undercuts everything it becomes a mechanical thing. It's filling in the blocks, painting by numbers type of thing. And you lose the real essence of what's going on. For us, it was important, first of all, to get the operational stuff out of the way. And in the process of doing that, you build up a trust. So you just don't come in and go to confession. You just don't, rap on the wall and slide the board and start going to confession. Because you have no idea what's on the other side of the screen. In the confessional, it's a priest. And that's all you need to know. But in this case, you need to know, can I trust you? And how much can I trust you? It's better if we're in the same cell. It's easier because we're eyeball to eyeball. And it doesn't take you very long, depending how senior, how much experience you've had in leadership, to size somebody up and figure it out. Then it becomes important to know, what are they doing? And in the process of what are they doing, you end up telling your own story, because all you can do is tell what happened to you. They are torturing. What kind of torture are they using today? What did they use on you? And because it goes from the operational, you get into the torture, which is operational, but then we're all of a sudden into your emotions and reactions to it. It just easily goes to the point of, I felt like I'm the only person that betrayed the country. I was commit suicide if I had the opportunity to. I'm never going to go home again. I could give a rat's ass whether I live or die. Type of thing. And you just come out, this is the reaction. And then, very frankly, part of it was just the same question. How did you cure that? Because you need that for your bag of tricks. Next time I get tortured, maybe I can use this to lessen the effect. Maybe I can use this to resist longer. So you start asking them about, well, what tricks did you use? What resistance did you use? And exchanging that information is extremely helpful, and it's business-like. It's not like going to confession or bearing your soul. These are all operationally related. Well, for example, the height of a flight deck of an aircraft carrier is 40 feet. Because they torture so many people and there's so many lies, that's the accepted answer for the Vietnamese intelligence people. The height of the TACAN antenna on an aircraft carrier is 120 feet. Because I haven't the faintest idea what it is, but that's what we all lied, and that was the mean. And the swimming pool on an aircraft carrier is in Hangar Bay too. And the bar in a B-52, because Air Force people can't fly without drink. You didn't know that. Vietnamese convinced of that. The only reason you can fly B-52s is you're drunk. And that's how Americans keep people going, feeding them booze. So we'll find, I'll confess. The location of the bar, and the crew chief substitutes as a bartender, and it's about this big, and it's at frame number 32 of the B-52. So next time you get tortured, you'll be able to divulge that sensitive information. But it's nice to know what the answer is, because you can end up getting tortured, and now you're trying to invent an answer, and it doesn't meet the answer. So if you tell me what the lie is the Air Force has been telling about my swimming pool, I'll tell you about the lie about the B-52 and where its bar is and stuff like that. So there's a practicality to sharing this information. And then as I get to know you, then it becomes confessional. And you bear the whole thing out. And then all of a sudden you find out, well, some guy had it worse than you. You had it better than most. And you get things accommodated in your position, and you say, we're all in this together. But we were convinced we were all going to be court-martialed when we came home. We were tagging on many things he did was, you will have school of the ship. You will be teaching courses, this, that, and the other. We had a Toastmasters operation in the cell I was in. We had French, we had engineering, we had trigonometry, we had geometry, we had whatever you knew best, you were expected to prepare a course and teach it. And if you wanted to take it, it was a good curriculum type of thing. And you could come up with a certain expertise and teach this and teach that type of stuff. So in the process, you learned even more about people. You learned about their intellect and how they thought, and we had class to the point. We had a class taught by a lawyer. George Baudet was a lawyer, and taught by how do you handle a court-martial? What do you look for in a defense counsel? Assumption was you are going to be, well, they did. The first few people come out of Korea, they ran them in front of a court-martial. FBI was making book on me. I know this from Dr. Roger Shields, who was in the Defense Department, because he knocked it off. They were keeping book on me from the Life magazine. So that wasn't that far out. Toastmasters had a section on 15 minutes of fame. How do you present yourself in that news clip, that soundbite that says what you want to convey, because that's all you're going to get. We didn't have any idea about the warmth of the welcome. We knew about how the troops were being received, and we expected to be spat upon and crapped upon when we came home. So if you had just 5 minutes in front of the camera, 5 seconds in front of the camera, which is soundbite. Jerry Denton was practicing his speech on the tarmac. God bless America, God bless Richard Nixon. He was practicing that for 2 years. I was in the cell when and had to listen to it when it was first iteration of it. But that's where it was exactly what he should have been doing, because he figured that's all he was going to get. And he better say what he had to say. And so people say, well, that sounds canned. It was given to you by the president to say, Nixon, everybody hated Nixon. Everybody hates Trump. Everybody hates everybody else. And he practiced and he said it. And they said, well, it looked canned and it was given to you by the president. No, it was canned because he practiced it and canned it because he was suspicious of y'all. Didn't trust you. And that paid off. That paid off. So you never knew exactly what you were going to get into, but you could plan for it. And this is, once again, this is the wisdom of the leadership. We're not going to just sit here and teach you French and Italian. We're going to teach you how to survive. If they do this to you when you come home, here's what's open to you. Here's how you handle it. You don't act surprised. And it wasn't with bitterness or anything else. These dirty rats are going to do this type of stuff. It's just an automatic, If the fuel pump goes out, what do? You put on the alternate fuel pump. You reduce power, you reduce your altitude. And in the same vein, if they court-martial you, what are you going to do? And it was the same, here's how you handle the type of thing. Not these dirty rats are going to get you, and then just a matter of plain physics. You're going to get 15 minutes of fame, you better figure out how you're going to use it. And they did. And the people who listened to Stockdale, like Denton, came out smelling like a rose. And the people that didn't listen, well, that's why we have people crash and bad things happen. Pay attention to your boss.
Well, I'm gonna allow you to take a little break here. You're amazing storyteller, sir. I am just, it's such an honor for me to sit with you. We're gonna cut camera, give you a bathroom break, and we'll take a bathroom break, and then we'll come back and we'll have just a little under an hour to finish up.
Do I have to go to the bathroom?
No, you don't.
We are not gonna watch, I'll promise you that. Let's do a tail marker before you
What
cut.
Oh,
man
yes, tell
over
Mark. We didn't do
55
that,
doesn't
Mark.
need to go to the
Yes, we did.
bathroom after
We
2
did.
hours?
Yeah, we
I
did.
said, what man over 55 doesn't need to go?
A guy that flies an A4 that doesn't have a relief tube in it.
Sorry, is this good, Bill?
Yeah, that's good for me, go. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, I'm gonna cut now.
I was making fun of Collins because it's like he's a camel. Maybe it was. I said, you never go to the bathroom.
Not sure where-
I was fascinated with this guy. We got to go before we go to the movie, after we go to the movie.
Well, I tell you, no, it comes with, when they designed the airplane, a little plastic baggie
Yeah.
for you to urinate in
No, it's definitely not.
to save weight.
Do that with your foot.
Well, I said you didn't.
Anything that's on the light side.
Right.
Yeah,
Sometimes you
but
just
you
cam
have a
yourself.
lot
Who
of really
cares?
bright background, so.
You empty,
have to do.
you empty yourself before you go.
Yeah, I'll
And
You were there.
push it to you.
you can't cross your legs. There's no room in the cockpit to cross your legs. I
You
mean,
could probably turn the refrigerator on and.
Yeah, let me go and do
You
that.
guys are all such big guys. I don't know how
I'm
you
sorry,
fit in
because
that.
the sun did come out a
claustrophobic.
lot
Yeah,
brighter,
no, I appreciate
and the
it.
whole world got.
well, some of the planes had decent sized cockpits, but like I said, the A4 was a small one.
I'm gonna go order our lunch so that I can pick it up.
Um,
But it's just riveting, Dick.
Yeah. Dick, you don't need to use the restroom, sir? Okay, I'm gonna go use it.
So Dick, you were talking about the Air Force guys, some of them were quite old. And that resonated with me because when I was a senior in high school, and I was already accepted into college, so I knew that I wasn't gonna get drafted, at least not right then. My dad was a career Air Force officer, he was a pilot. But he was near the end of his career and close to retirement. But apparently they had made a deal with all of the pilots who were younger that no one would go back for a second tour until everybody who was an eligible pilot had gone for their first tour. And so here I am, I'm 17 going on 18, and my father went to Vietnam for a year. And he was in his mid-50s, close to retirement. And his job, what he did is he flew transport aircraft. And so he flew C-123s, doing what he wrote down in his logbooks, which I have, as special ops. I came to find out he was spraying Agent Orange. And it affected his health. He unfortunately is no longer with us, which is unfortunate. But he also had a problem with alcoholism, and I guess you coach people with addictions. I learned the hard way that there's really not a lot you can do. And for someone who has an addiction, they have to work it out for themselves.
You can help them when they make up their mind that they want to.
That they want help.
They want help.
Yeah,
That's the.
yeah.
And unfortunately, with certain drugs, you can't help them even when they make up their mind they want to help.
Oh, yeah.
But with booze, you can. Once a person makes up their mind that they want to help, and for some of them, they have a rather flat learning curve, and it takes 2 or 3 times in the tank before they finally do it. The Navy found out that maybe about half of them would have to go through the tank twice.
Yeah. My dad tried, give him credit, he tried, but the combination of the effects of the Agent Orange, he had like lesions on his face and different parts of his body, and he was trying to self-medicate with
Yeah.
alcohol. And I took it hard because you respect your father. You probably highly respect yours.
Oh, absolutely.
But then when I saw him failing, I blamed him. You know, because he was the person that taught me to be honorable. Yet he was behaving, in my opinion, dishonorably. So it was really hard for me to ultimately forgive him, which I did. But it was an interesting journey.
You know, it's such a fine line when they start going downhill. The difference between supporting